She had always loved music, but it was never meant to be shared with anyone else. It was her own secret world, a place where she could escape from the noise of everyday life and the constant weight of expectations. When she was a child, she would spend hours in her small room, tapping out melodies on the piano, imagining herself somewhere far away where nobody could see her mistakes or hear her doubts. She never dreamed of performing in front of others. The thought alone made her stomach tighten and her hands shake. It all began on an ordinary evening when she was visiting a friend she had known for years. The friend was cheerful and energetic, always full of ideas and plans, often dragging her along into situations she would normally avoid. On this particular day, the friend had something unusual in mind. They wanted her to perform at a local talent showcase. It's a small event in the town hall that promised a lively audience and perhaps a chance for recognition. The friend thought it would be a fun and encouraging experience. But when they mentioned it to her, she froze. She couldn't even find the words to respond. The idea of stepping onto a stage under bright lights in front of strangers terrified her. Her mind raced with questions she didn't want to answer. What if I mess up? What if people laugh at me? What if my hands start shaking and I hit the wrong notes? She had spent her life avoiding attention, feeling comfortable behind the piano keys where she controlled everything. And now suddenly, the comfort of her private world was about to be stripped away. Her friend, however, was persistent, and it became clear that this wasn't just a casual suggestion. Somehow, without her realizing it, her name had already been submitted to the organizers. Invitations had been sent. She was expected to be there. There was no turning back. Panic surged through her as she realized she had been trapped in a situation she hadn't chosen. She wanted to run, to disappear, to curl up and pretend it was all a dream. But she couldn't. The commitment was real, and she had to face it. That night. She tried to practice in her room, but her mind was too restless. She pressed the keys softly, almost absent-mindedly, as her anxiety gnawed at her. Every melody she played seemed to fall flat, each note tinged with tension rather than the beauty she normally felt. She remembered her friend's words, trying to convince her, "You're really good. People will love it. You'll see." But those words did little to ease the storm inside her. How could she perform if she could barely believe in herself? Her family tried to encourage her, not knowing the full extent of her fear. They told her that taking a chance could lead to opportunities she had never imagined. But even their support was not enough to quiet the fear. The fear was louder than encouragement. It whispered constantly in her ear, telling her she wasn't ready, that she wasn't good enough, that this would end in embarrassment. She could feel the cold weight of it pressing against her chest as she tried to sleep, tossing and turning in the dark. Imagining what the stage might look like and how the audience might react, the next day came, and with it, a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. She couldn't stop thinking about what would happen once she was on that stage. In some part of her mind, a small voice, fragile and hesitant, suggested that maybe, just maybe, she could surprise herself. Maybe she could discover something she hadn't known about herself all these years. But it was a tiny voice, almost drowned out by the roar of fear. She told herself it was foolish to even think about performing, and yet the thought lingered, like a faint glow in a dark room. When the evening of the talent showcase arrived, her heart raced as she approached the venue. The building was buzzing with life, laughter, and chatter. Performers rehearsed their acts, stretching, tuning instruments, and talking excitedly with friends and family. She felt invisible among them, yet completely exposed at the same time. She had never experienced anything like this. The world outside her room was so loud, so immediate, and she was painfully aware of every eye that could possibly be on her. Backstage. She stood in the shadows, clutching the piano bench nervously, wishing she could disappear. Her hands were cold and stiff, and her legs shook with anticipation. She watched the other performers, some confident, some just as nervous as she was. The contrast between them and herself was stark. She wanted to turn away, to leave quietly, but there was nowhere to go. Someone had already told the organizers she would perform. The commitment was real. She had no choice but to face it. A mentor, noticing her trembling, came over. He spoke softly, offering words meant to calm her. Just play what you love. Don't think about anyone else. The audience wants to hear you, not perfection." His presence was comforting in a way she hadn't expected. She nodded, though her fear did not dissipate. She knew she had to step onto the stage soon, and the thought made her stomach flip. But she also felt a strange sense of determination. Perhaps this was her chance, even if it had been forced upon her, to see what she could do when she faced her fear. When her turn finally came, she walked slowly to the stage, each step feeling heavier than the last. The lights were blinding, the audience a shadowy mass of faces staring up at her. She approached the piano and sat down, feeling the coolness of the keys under her fingers. Her first touch was tentative, almost hesitant, but as she began to play, something shifted inside her. She focused on the melody, letting it guide her rather than letting fear control her. The music was soft at first, cautious, but gradually it became more confident. She began to lose herself in the notes, forgetting the audience, forgetting the stage, forgetting everything except the music. Every key she pressed told a story she had never shared. Every melody, a reflection of her hidden strength. She realized that the music had always been inside her, waiting for a moment like this to emerge. She could feel her fear slowly giving way to something new: excitement, joy, and a deep sense of connection to the sound she was creating. As she continued, the audience began to notice the transformation. The murmurs faded, replaced by attentive silence. Eyes widened, people leaned forward, and the energy in the room shifted. She could sense their curiosity and surprise, though she still did not allow herself to think about them directly. The music was hers, and it was powerful. Her confidence grew with each note, each chord, and she began to feel something she had never felt before: pride. Not pride in being seen or recognized, but pride in herself, in the courage it took to simply begin. By the end of her first piece, she was no longer the timid, reluctant girl who had arrived at the showcase. She was someone who had dared to step into the unknown, who had let her true self emerge through the piano. The applause that followed was unexpected, but it did not overwhelm her. Instead, it confirmed something she had suspected all along: she had strength, talent, and a voice that could touch others. Even though she had been forced into this moment, she had claimed it in her own way. As she left the stage, she realized something important. Fear could be a powerful force, but so could courage, even when it was born out of circumstance. She had discovered a part of herself she had never known existed. And for the first time, she began to imagine what might happen if she allowed herself to explore it further. That night, she did not just perform. She learned in the most unexpected way that sometimes life pushes you into moments you are afraid of, and in those moments, you can find your greatest strength. The experience left her shaken, exhilarated, and profoundly changed. She returned home that night with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder, replaying the music in her mind, feeling the echo of every note. She realized that while she had been forced into this performance, she had embraced it fully, and that made all the difference. She understood now that even when the world pushes you forward, your response, your courage, your willingness to try can turn an uncomfortable situation into a life-changing moment. And as she lay in bed, her fingers still tingling from the keys, she could not stop thinking about what had happened. A small smile crept across her face. She knew that this was only the beginning. The world she had feared was not as frightening as she had imagined, and her own potential was far greater than she had ever believed. She had survived the night, faced her fear, and discovered a hidden part of herself. Music, once a private refuge, had become a bridge between her and the world, and for the first time, she felt ready to see where it could take her. She woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of emotions. Excitement, nervousness, and disbelief tangled together inside her like a knot she could not untie. The previous night's performance had been terrifying, but also strangely liberating. She kept replaying the notes in her mind, remembering how the keys had felt beneath her fingers and how the music seemed to flow through her in a way she had never experienced before. Yet, even with that memory, a lingering unease followed her. She had never performed in front of anyone before. Her world had always been private, quiet, safe. But now she had tasted what it was like to be exposed, to have people watch her every move and listen to every note. The attention was uncomfortable at first, yet there was a spark in it that excited her, a curiosity that refused to be ignored. She wanted to see what she could do next, to test herself further, but fear still held her back. Her friend, the one who had signed her up for the showcase in the first place, called early that morning. Their voice was bright and cheerful, full of energy. "You did amazing last night. People were talking about your music even after the show ended. You have to keep going. Don't let this be a one-time thing." The words were meant to encourage her, and they did, but they also added pressure. She didn't feel ready. She wasn't sure if she could do it again. The thought of performing twice, in front of strangers, made her stomach twist. Despite her hesitation, she felt a pull she could not explain. The music had awakened something in her, a feeling that was both terrifying and thrilling. She knew she had to explore it, even if it was uncomfortable. She spent the day at home, sitting at the piano for hours, letting her fingers wander over the keys. She tried to recreate the melodies she had played the night before, but her mind kept wandering. She worried about what the audience would think, how they would react, and whether she could live up to the expectations that had suddenly formed around her. In the afternoon, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The streets were quiet, with just the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional chatter of neighbors. She walked slowly, feeling the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She thought about the showcase, about the people she had played for, about the small spark of confidence she had felt when the music finally took over. It was a feeling she had never known before, a sense of control and power that came from creating something beautiful in front of others as she walked. She passed a small cafe where live music often played. Inside, a young musician was practicing on a guitar, lost in his own world. She paused, listening, and felt a connection she could not explain. It reminded her that music was a language everyone could understand, a way to share feelings without words. She realized that performing was not just about showing off talent or being judged. It was about sharing a piece of herself with the world, letting others feel what she felt, even if only for a few moments. By the time she returned home, her mind was clearer. She sat at the piano and began to play, not thinking about anyone else, not worrying about mistakes. The music flowed more freely than it had the night before. Her fingers moved with confidence, exploring new melodies and harmonies. She felt alive in a way she had never felt before. The fear was still there, a faint whisper at the edge of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. She had tasted what it meant to be courageous, and it had changed her. Later that evening, she received a message from the showcase organizers. They were hosting another event next week and asked if she would like to perform again. Her first instinct was to say no. She was nervous, unsure, and still processing the previous night. But as she sat with the message, she felt a quiet determination rising inside her. She had already faced her fear once. Could she do it again? The thought was daunting, but also exciting. She realized that this was an opportunity to grow, to push herself further than she ever had before. She agreed to perform, but with a condition: she would play only what she wanted. Music that came from her heart, not pieces chosen by others. This was important to her. She had learned that performing was not about meeting expectations or pleasing others. It was about authenticity, about sharing something real. She spent the next few days preparing, practicing tirelessly, experimenting with new melodies, and refining the pieces she wanted to play. Every hour at the piano built her confidence, and every note she played reminded her of the power she held within herself. As the day of the next performance approached, she felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She knew that the audience would be larger this time, and the pressure was higher. Backstage, she watched the other performers, noting their calm confidence and ease. She envied them, but she also recognized that her own journey was different. Her confidence had been hard-won, and it was real, not just a show. She took a deep breath, centering herself, and reminded herself that she was ready. She had faced fear before, and she could do it again. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with a sense of purpose. The lights were bright, the audience attentive, but she did not focus on them. She focused on the music, on the story she wanted to tell through each note. Her fingers danced across the keys, more fluidly than ever. The melodies were bold, expressive, and full of emotion. She felt herself becoming one with the music, losing awareness of the audience, the stage, and even herself. It was as if she had entered a different world, a place where only the music existed, and she was free. The audience was captivated. They watched in silence, leaning forward as the music unfolded. She could sense their surprise and admiration, but she did not let it distract her. Each note was intentional, each pause deliberate. She told a story through her fingers, a story of fear, courage, and discovery. The room seemed to hold its breath as she played, and she felt a deep connection to every person watching. For the first time, she understood the power of music to touch hearts and minds, to communicate in ways words could not. By the end of her performance, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, but instead of fear, she felt pride and joy. She had done it. She had faced her fear again, and this time she had played not out of obligation, but out of desire and passion. The experience left her exhilarated and transformed. She realized that performing was not about seeking approval or avoiding embarrassment. It was about embracing her talent, sharing her gift, trusting herself to rise to the occasion. After the show, people approached her with kind words and admiration. Some were musicians themselves, offering encouragement and advice. Others were strangers who had been moved by her music, expressing how deeply it had touched them. She listened, humbled, and amazed. She realized that her music had the power to create connections, to evoke emotions, and to inspire others. It was more than she had ever imagined, and it motivated her to continue pursuing her passion, no matter how daunting it seemed. In the days that followed, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the fear she had felt, the reluctance that had initially held her back, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She realized that fear was not something to avoid, but something to confront. Each time she faced it, she grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities. She had learned that true growth often comes from stepping outside of comfort zones. Even when it feels uncomfortable or frightening, her confidence continued to build as she prepared for future performances. She experimented with different styles and compositions, allowing herself to take risks and explore new musical territory. She discovered a creativity and depth she had never known existed. Each performance became a chance to share a part of herself, to connect with others, and to express emotions that were too complex for words alone. The stage was no longer a place of fear, but a space for expression and discovery. As she played, she remembered the first time she had been forced into performing. At the time, it had felt like an imposition, something she had been forced to endure. But now, she understood that it had been a turning point, a moment that had opened the door to a world she had never imagined. She had discovered her voice, her strength, and her ability to connect with others through music. What had begun as reluctance had transformed into passion. She embraced it fully. With each new performance, her reputation grew. People began to recognize her, to seek her out for advice, and to celebrate her talent. She remained humble, aware that her journey had been shaped by both fear and courage. She never forgot the lessons she had learned, and she carried them with her as she continued to explore her musical path. Each note, each melody, each performance was a testament to her growth, her resilience, and her willingness to embrace the unknown. By the end of this chapter of her life, she had become more than just a talented musician. She had become a storyteller, a connector, and a source of inspiration for those who watched her. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. Courage, determination, and the willingness to face fear were equally important. And she knew that her journey was just beginning, that there were countless stories yet to be told through her music, and countless hearts yet to be touched. She had performed twice now, and yet a nervous flutter still lingered whenever she stepped onto the stage. Each time the lights seemed brighter, the audience larger, and the feeling of exposure more intense. But something had begun to change inside her. Fear was no longer the only thing that dominated her thoughts. A quiet curiosity had taken root, a desire to see how far she could go, to discover what her music could do to touch the people around her. This particular evening, She arrived at a larger venue than before. The room was filled with folding chairs, neatly arranged in rows, and a small stage at the front. People were slowly filing in, chattering and laughing as they found their seats. She could feel their energy through the air, a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Her hands were still trembling, but she pressed them to her sides, trying to focus on the music she wanted to play rather than the audience that awaited her. Backstage, she found a quiet corner to practice a few last notes. Her fingers moved across the keys almost instinctively now, and she could feel her confidence growing. She thought about the last two performances and how differently she had approached them. The first had been about survival, pushing through fear because she had been forced into the spotlight. The second had been about exploration, allowing herself to play music that came from her heart. And now, she felt a new challenge: to connect deeply with the audience, to make them feel the emotions she wanted to share. The organizer called her name, and she took a deep breath before walking to the stage. As she stepped into the light, the bright glow of the overhead bulbs startled her momentarily. The audience was larger than before, and she could see the rows of faces, some familiar, many strangers. She felt her chest tighten, but she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned. She focused not on their judgment, but on the story she wanted to tell. She sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The first few notes were gentle, almost hesitant, but she let them flow naturally. She began with a simple melody, one that had comforted her in her private hours of practice. The sound filled the room, soft but steady, and she could see the audience leaning forward, drawn in by the delicate tones. There was a quiet hum in the air, a sense of anticipation as if everyone was waiting for the music to speak to them. And it did. Slowly, as the melody unfolded, the room grew silent, and all eyes were on her. As she continued, she allowed her emotions to guide her fingers. Each note carried a story, moments of fear, hesitation, discovery, and hope. She remembered the nights she had spent alone at the piano, practicing doubting herself and finding small victories with every chord. Those experiences gave her music authenticity. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And the audience responded to that. She could feel their attention, not as pressure, but as a connection. Her music was becoming a bridge between her inner world and theirs. The piece grew in intensity. She shifted from gentle melodies to more complex harmonies, exploring dynamics and tempo with care. The piano seemed to come alive under her fingers, resonating with the emotion she poured into it. She no longer thought about mistakes or judgment. She thought only of the music and the feelings she wanted to convey. With every chord, she felt herself opening up more, letting the audience into a part of her they would not have seen otherwise. A few people in the audience had tears in their eyes. She noticed their expressions, though she didn't allow herself to become distracted. Each tear, each small smile, each quiet gasp from the crowd reminded her that music had a power she could not have imagined. She realized that the moment she had dreaded for so long, the exposure, the vulnerability, was now what made the experience profound. By sharing herself, by daring to be seen, she had created something that moved others deeply. Halfway through her performance, she paused for a breath, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She looked out at the audience and felt a wave of gratitude and humility. This was no longer just a performance for her. It had become an exchange, a silent conversation between her heart and theirs. She felt their emotions mingling with hers, a ripple of empathy and understanding moving through the room. The nervous, hesitant girl who had first been forced to perform was gone. In her place stood someone who understood the depth of her own strength. As she played the second part of her piece, she experimented with a few improvisations. The music took on a life of its own, shifting between gentle and bold, playful and somber. She allowed herself to follow her intuition, letting her heart guide her fingers. Each note was a reflection of her journey, her fears, her courage, and the joy she had discovered in performing. She felt herself becoming lost in the music, as if nothing else existed except the keys, the sound, and the connection to the people listening. The audience responded subtly at first, leaning closer, nodding along, holding their breath in quiet appreciation. She could sense their surprise and admiration, though she did not need it to fuel her performance. What mattered was the honesty of her expression, the authenticity she brought to every note. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, as if the music had awakened something within each person present. She could feel the rhythm of their attention, the silent dialogue that exists between performer and listener, and it gave her confidence she had never known before. By the time she reached the final section of her piece, her playing had grown powerful, yet intimate. She explored the full range of the piano, letting her emotions surge and recede like waves. She was no longer just performing. She was telling a story that only music could convey. She felt the weight of each chord, the resonance of every note, and the subtle reactions of the audience. Their attention was focused entirely on her, yet she did not feel pressure. She felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose, a realization that her music could touch people in ways she had never dreamed. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, leaving a delicate silence that hung for a moment before the audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, but this time it was different. She did not feel panic or fear. She felt gratitude and joy. She had done more than play a piece of music. She had created an experience, a moment of connection that would remain in the minds and hearts of those who had listened. She smiled softly, her fingers still resting on the keys, savoring the sensation of accomplishment and shared emotion. As she stood and acknowledged the audience, she felt their admiration wash over her. People approached afterward, some offering compliments, others expressing how deeply the music had affected them. Each interaction reinforced what she had already begun to understand, that her talent was not just a private gift, but a bridge to the wider world. She had the ability to inspire, to move, and to bring a sense of comfort and joy to those who experienced her music. Backstage, she sat quietly for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade and the sense of achievement settle in. She reflected on how far she had come from a timid girl forced into performing to someone who could captivate an audience and evoke deep emotion. She realized that her journey was still just beginning. There were countless melodies she had yet to explore, countless emotions to convey, and countless people to reach. Each performance would be a step forward, a chance to grow, and a chance to share herself more fully. That night, as she returned home, she replayed the performance in her mind. She remembered the faces in the audience, the quiet gasps of surprise, the tears, the smiles. She thought about the music itself, how it had flowed through her, how it had become a part of her story. She understood that this was the path she was meant to follow, not for recognition, not for approval, but for the joy of creating, for the connection it brought, and for the discovery of her own strength in the days that followed. She continued to practice and experiment, exploring new melodies and compositions. She felt a growing sense of purpose and direction, clarity that had been absent from her life before she had been forced to perform. She realized that every moment of fear, every hesitation, and every challenge had been a stepping stone, leading her to this point where she could embrace her talent fully and share it with the world. She also began to notice changes in herself outside of music. Her confidence in everyday situations grew. She approached people more easily, spoke her mind without hesitation, and felt a sense of self-assurance she had never known. The lessons she had learned on the stage, the courage to face fear, the importance of authenticity, and the power of connection were now influencing every part of her life. She was becoming stronger, braver, and more open to the possibilities that lay ahead. Looking back on the journey, she realized that being forced to perform had been a gift in disguise. It had pushed her out of her comfort zone, forced her to confront her fears, and revealed a part of herself she might never have discovered otherwise. She understood now that life often presents challenges in unexpected ways, and that the way we respond to them can define who we are and who we become. By the end of this chapter of her life, she was no longer defined by fear or hesitation. She had embraced her music, her talent, and her ability to connect with others. She had learned that vulnerability could be a source of strength, that sharing oneself with the world could bring joy and meaning, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had begun a journey that would continue to grow and evolve with every note she played. The experience transformed her in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer the timid, reluctant girl who had once been forced to perform. She'd become a performer in her own right. Someone who understood the power of music, the importance of authenticity, and the beauty of connection. And as she looked ahead, she felt ready for whatever challenges and opportunities might come next. Confident in her ability to face them with courage, grace, and the music that flowed through her heart. She had been performing for some time now, and with each performance her confidence grew. But this evening felt different. There was a certain electricity in the air, an energy she could sense as soon as she arrived at the venue. The hall was larger than any she had ever played in. Rows of chairs stretched farther back than she could see, and the stage was wide and high, with bright lights casting shadows across the polished floor. People were filing in steadily, filling seats with chatter and anticipation. She could feel their curiosity, their expectation, and it made her heart race in a way she had never experienced before. Backstage, she paced quietly, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. She had been here before, and she knew what to expect, yet something about this audience felt more intense, more critical. She could hear snippets of conversations, people asking if she had performed before, wondering what she would play. The weight of their attention pressed on her, but she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned. Fear was temporary, but the music, her music, could leave a lasting impression. She sat at the piano for a brief moment, her fingers grazing the keys. Letting the familiar sensation ground her, the organizer gave her a nod. And she stood, walking to the center of the stage. The lights hit her squarely, and she squinted, adjusting her vision. The audience seemed vast and distant, yet she felt an invisible connection forming. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the cool surface beneath her fingers, listening to the quiet hum of the room. Then she began. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant, but she allowed them to bloom into a gentle melody that filled the hall. The audience leaned in, drawn by the purity and sincerity of the sound. She played as if speaking directly to each person, every chord a sentence, every pause a breath in a conversation. For a moment, the stage and the lights disappeared, and she was only the music, and the music was only her. As the piece continued, she explored its depth. Moving from gentle passages to more dynamic and expressive sections, her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, each note conveying the emotions she had hidden for so long. There was fear, yes, but it was paired with exhilaration and joy. She felt the energy of the audience, their silent attention, their anticipation, and she allowed it to flow into her playing. She realized that the performance was no longer about herself alone. It was about sharing something universal, something that touched the hearts of everyone listening. Halfway through the piece, she closed her eyes. The music became even more personal, more expressive. Each chord carried layers of emotion, years of hesitation, moments of self-doubt. Victories found in small, private hours of practice. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to let the audience hear not just her skill, but her heart. The hall seemed to lean closer, as if the audience could sense the honesty in her performance. There was a quiet hush, the kind of silence that only comes when people are fully captivated. Completely present in the moment, she began to experiment with tempo and dynamics, adding subtle pauses and flourishes that made the music breathe. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice that could speak volumes without words. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, guided by intuition and emotion rather than thought. She was fully immersed, completely in control, yet entirely free. Every note resonated, not just in the room, but in the hearts of those listening. A few people in the audience whispered quietly to each other, unable to hide their amazement. Some had seen many performers before, but this was different. There was a depth to her playing, a story unfolding in real time that seemed to touch something deep within everyone. Tears glistened in the eyes of some, while others sat in awe, silent, unable to look away. The music had a power she had not fully realized until this moment. She was not just performing, she was moving people, connecting with them in a way that words never could. The final section of her piece approached, and she felt a surge of adrenaline and focus. The notes became bold and commanding, yet they retained a softness, a sense of intimacy that drew the audience in. She allowed herself to feel the emotion fully: pride, joy, vulnerability, strength, and it poured into her playing. The music built to a crescendo, filling every corner of the hall with its intensity. She was no longer afraid. She was alive, fully present, and completely herself as the final note rang out. There was a brief moment of stillness, a heartbeat of silence that seemed to hang in the air. Then the audience erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, filling the hall, bouncing off the walls, and wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She rose from the piano, her hands trembling slightly, and bowed. People were clapping, cheering, some even standing. She felt a rush of emotions: relief, joy, pride, and something deeper, a sense of connection that she had never experienced before. Backstage, she could hear people talking about her performance in hushed, reverent tones. "She's incredible," someone whispered. "I've never felt anything like that before." The words made her heart swell, but she remained quiet, letting the applause and admiration wash over her without being the center of it. She realized that what mattered was not the recognition itself, but the knowledge that she had touched lives, even if only for a few moments. The music had communicated something universal, something that transcended fear and doubt. As she left the stage and returned to her dressing room, she reflected on her journey. Each performance had been a step forward, a challenge she had faced and overcome. But this one felt like a turning point. She had not just played music, she had shared herself fully and honestly. She had allowed vulnerability to become strength, fear to become focus, and hesitation to become expression. The experience left her both exhausted and exhilarated, filled with a sense of purpose and clarity she had never known before. In the following days, the impact of her performance became evident. People approached her with admiration and gratitude, sharing how deeply the music had affected them. Some were musicians themselves, inspired by her skill and authenticity. Others were strangers who had simply been moved by the emotion conveyed through the piano. She listened to their words with humility, understanding that the true reward of her performance was not applause or recognition, but the connections she had forged and the emotions she had stirred. Her confidence continued to grow. She practiced daily, exploring new compositions, experimenting with improvisation, and refining her technique. But she also focused on expression, on authenticity, on the emotional power of music. She realized that skill alone was not enough. It had to be paired with honesty and vulnerability. Each performance became a new opportunity to share herself and to create a meaningful experience for the audience. She began to see music not just as a personal refuge, but as a bridge to others, a way to communicate what words could not. With each passing day, she noticed subtle changes in herself. She was more confident in social situations, more willing to take risks, more open to new experiences. The courage she had discovered on stage began to influence her life outside of music. She approached challenges with determination, spoke her mind without hesitation, and trusted her instincts. The lessons she had learned through performance: courage, vulnerability, authenticity were becoming integral parts of her character. She also realized that her journey was far from over. Each performance, each new audience, presented a fresh challenge and a chance to grow. She embraced this, viewing every opportunity as a step toward becoming the musician she wanted to be and the person she wanted to become. She understood that fear would never disappear entirely, but she now knew how to face it, to channel it into strength, and to transform it into something beautiful. One evening after another successful performance, she sat alone at her piano, reflecting on her progress. She thought about the first time she had been forced to perform, how terrified she had felt, and how far she had come since then. That moment, which had seemed like a cruel twist of fate at the time, had become the catalyst for her transformation. She had discovered her courage, her talent, and her ability to connect with others. She had learned that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, there is the potential for growth, discovery. In triumph, the music flowed easily from her fingers as she played that night. each note a testament to her journey. She no longer played simply to survive or to meet expectations. She played to express, to connect, and to explore the depths of her own abilities. She felt a sense of fulfillment and joy that came from doing what she was meant to do, from embracing her gift fully and sharing it with the world. The piano had become an extension of herself, a medium through which she could communicate the essence of who she was. By the end of the evening, she understood something profound, that her journey was not just about music, but about life. She had learned to face fear, embrace vulnerability, and trust herself. She had discovered that the moments that challenge us most often lead to our greatest growth. And she had realized that the courage to step into the unknown, to risk failure, and to share oneself, honestly, can create experiences that touch hearts and leave lasting impressions. She knew that the road ahead would bring new challenges, new audiences, and new opportunities to test herself. But she no longer feared them. She had found her strength, her voice, and her purpose. She was ready to continue her journey, to explore new musical landscapes, and to inspire others through her art. And as she played the final notes that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for every step that had brought her to this moment, for every fear she had faced, and for every connection she had made. After the night of her most powerful performance, she felt a quiet calm she had never known before. The adrenaline and excitement had faded, leaving behind a deep sense of fulfillment. She had played with everything she had, every emotion, every thought, every bit of herself, and the audience had felt it. The applause, the standing ovation, and the expressions of awe were still vivid in her memory. But more than that, she realized that she had discovered something within herself that no one could ever take away. The courage to step into the unknown and embrace her true talent. The days that followed were filled with unexpected opportunities. People who had attended her performance reached out to her, offering invitations to play at local events, community gatherings, and even small private functions. At first, she hesitated. The thought of performing again, in new spaces, with unfamiliar faces, was intimidating. But then she remembered the feeling she had experienced on stage, the connection with the audience, the way the music had flowed effortlessly when she had allowed herself to be vulnerable. Slowly, she realized that this was not just a chance to play music, it was a chance to continue growing, to continue sharing herself, and to continue discovering what she was capable of. Her confidence grew with each new opportunity. She found herself experimenting more, improvising melodies that came straight from her heart, exploring dynamics and harmonies she had never tried before. She began to see music not just as a skill or a performance, but as a living, breathing expression of who she was. Each note carried a piece of her story, and she realized that by sharing it, she could touch people in ways that words could never reach. One afternoon, she received a call from a local cultural organization that hosted concerts and showcases for talented musicians. They had heard about her performance and wanted her to play at their next event. The thought made her nervous at first. The audience would be larger, more formal, and filled with people she had never met. But as she sat with the idea, she felt a quiet excitement. She knew that she had grown far beyond the timid girl who had once been forced to perform. She was ready to embrace this new challenge. The day of the performance arrived. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves mixed with anticipation. She arrived early, finding a quiet spot to warm up and collect her thoughts. The stage was set beautifully, with soft lighting and a grand piano waiting at center stage. As she ran her fingers over the keys, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the first time she had been forced into performing, trembling and unsure, and how she had gradually transformed into someone who could command a room with her music. That memory gave her strength. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with a sense of purpose. The audience was larger than anything she had faced before, but she did not focus on the size or the faces. Instead, she focused on the music, on the emotions she wanted to convey. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were gentle, inviting the audience into her world. Gradually, the music grew, flowing with confidence and expression. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, each chord resonating with emotion and sincerity. The audience was captivated. They watched quietly, leaning in as the music unfolded. She felt the same connection she had experienced before, but it was deeper now, richer, more powerful. She realized that the music was no longer just about performance or recognition. It was about communication, about sharing something personal and meaningful with people who were willing to listen. Every note, every pause, every flourish was a conversation, and the audience was responding silently, emotionally. With their hearts, as she continued, she allowed herself to explore new melodies and harmonies, improvising sections that had never existed before. The music became an extension of herself, a reflection of her journey, her fears, her courage, and her joy. She played with abandon, fully immersed, letting the piano express what words could not. She could feel the energy of the audience, their attention, their awe, and she allowed it to inspire her rather than intimidate her. She realized that this was not just a performance. It was a celebration of everything she had overcome by the time she reached the final piece. She was playing with a power and grace she had never experienced before. The music swelled and softened, soared and lingered, carrying every emotion she had ever felt into the room. She could see people leaning forward, holding their breath, some with tears in their eyes. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music was not just heard but felt. The room was alive with the emotions she had poured into her playing, and she understood that this was the true power of music: to connect, to move, and to inspire. When the final note rang out, there was a brief, suspended silence, as if the audience could not immediately believe what they had experienced. Then, as one, they erupted into applause, cheers, and standing ovations. The sound was overwhelming, but she felt no fear, only a deep sense of gratitude and joy. She had done it. She had not only performed, she had touched hearts, inspired emotions, and shared a piece of herself that was uniquely hers.